Good morning, everyone. We're delighted to welcome you to NRBP's Economic Outlook Day 2. NRBP is connecting business for a greater Newark. We connect, inform, advocate, and engage our members to revitalize the city of Newark. We're committed to providing information and helping you to make important connections. If you are a member and you'd like to take advantage of our member care, please contact me. Maya will put my email in the chat. And if you're not a member, I'd also like to speak with you about the benefits of being part of this organization. This is an annual program, and until last year, we held it on one day. And this year, we're taking advantage of the virtual environment to be able to cover additional topics and delve a little bit deeper into what's happening in the economy. I hope some of you were able to join us yesterday for the fascinating presentations on technology, small business, real estate, and construction, as well as our economic report from NJEDA. A few of the highlights: several speakers noted that the supply chain pain is temporary and thought it will resolve as government stimulus lessens and businesses find their new normal. We'll see what the supply chain panel says today. The real estate panel talked about significant changes in the workplace with greater focus on amenities, meaning that costs may go up even with companies occupying less space, which seems to be the trend. In the small business panel, speakers cited a range of assistance programs and noted that small business and neighborhoods have thrived with people working from home, as co-working spaces have also benefited because there are some that don't want to go back to the office, but also want to leave the house. 5G means much more than your mobile phone. It allows things like autonomous vehicles and faster processing. It also helps smart cities with water metering and more. Michael Ehrlich at NJIT spoke about unintended consequences of technology, which mirrored the economic report, noting that productivity is high, meaning that there's fewer workers needed to produce at a high level. With innovation comes disruption in the way that we work. And I'm sure Leslie will go into that in a little bit more detail when we hear from her shortly. The logistics for today: the audience will be off camera and muted for the duration of the program. We have a packed agenda and will not be taking audience questions live. If you have a question, please put it into the Q&A, and we'll ask the speakers when they finish their comments to take a look and respond individually to any questions. I will be transitioning between all speakers and topics. Please see the chat for the overall program. Now I'd like to turn to the sponsors of today's program. The sponsor of our Real Estate Economic Development series is TD Bank. More about them in a moment. Breakfast sponsors are Edison Properties, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, Kukin Brothers Company Incorporated, NJEDA, NJIT, Martin Tuckman School of Management, PSE&G, Quest Diagnostics, Savills, and Structure Tone. Thanks to our media sponsor, NJ Advanced Media. It's now my pleasure to introduce Scott Beresford, Vice President and Senior Lending Officer at TD Bank, for very brief comments. Please welcome Scott.
Good morning, Barbara. Thank you so much for the nice introduction. Yesterday's program was amazing. I hope that everybody had an opportunity to attend it. Day 2, yes, TD Bank is the sponsor. It's really critical, particularly in this time, that we have events that bring all the businesses together and give us an opportunity to kind of see what's going on. As Barbara mentioned, yesterday's program talked about economics and what is going on. And today we're going to hear from some panelists, including Martin Mullally, Regional President for the Central Market of TD Bank. Had to put that ad in there. But we're going to be talking about supply chain and some of the other very vital things that are impacting every single one of the businesses out there. I mean, it's whether it's your home life, your work life, it's critical that we all kind of figure out how to get through this together. The New York Regional Business Partnership does a great job of putting programs together. I've been involved with the NRBP for quite a long time, been doing these intros for quite a long time as well. And what I'll say is, if you're not a member, strongly consider it. I think you really need to look at opportunities, particularly in the Newark area here. There's so many great things going on that Every time I get on an event or go to a networking, I learn something new. So make sure you get yourself involved more if you're not. I'd just like to do a little bit about TD Bank. Yesterday I mentioned about how we were very supportive in the PPP loan during the pandemic. You know, we produced 133,000 loans, $12.2 billion, which was support. What I didn't add is we also do a lot in the community. We had $3.5 million in grants from the TD Charitable Foundation. We also had $574,000 in community sponsorships just in New Jersey. We have 226 stores located in New Jersey. Myself and all of my coworkers would be more than happy to come out and talk to you about how we can help your business grow, how we can help your business continue to prosper in what have been really challenging times and changing times. So you're going to hear more about that today, but I just wanted to thank you. And again, TD Bank is very proud to be a sponsor of the events for the Newark Regional Business Partnership. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Scott. We really appreciate TD Bank's support. And if you're interested in sponsoring a program, please contact me and I can tell you about the benefits of it. I want to acknowledge Maya Curry, our Vice President of Communications and DEI. Maya always does a terrific job, and she's been in the background helping to make today possible. So thanks to Maya. Chip Halleck, NRBP's President and CEO, will add some additional updates at the end of the program. And now it's my great pleasure to begin the substance of the program with Jose Lozano, who's President and CEO of Choose New Jersey. I'll have my camera off until it's time for us to transition to the next speaker. Jose, it's all yours.
Good morning, Barbara, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. You know, 2021 has been a fascinating year from the economic development and the business attraction side. I lead Choose New Jersey, and for those that don't know, it's a 501c not-for-profit organization that really focuses on business attraction and marketing the state of New Jersey, both domestically and abroad. And I will tell you, if you just look at the wins and the amount of companies investing in New Jersey who have committed to coming to New Jersey in 2021, you would have never thought that a pandemic was happening. And just to ramble off a couple of, household names that you all will recognize, but, White Claw is doing a manufacturing facility in New Jersey with 500 individuals. Roche is doing committed to an additional 400 individuals that will be developing testing for COVID. Fiserv, one of the most recent ones, Fiserv is one of the Fortune 50 fintech companies, will be bringing in 3,000 new jobs to New Jersey. WebMD is coming into Newark, my hometown. We are currently in Gateway in Newark, but WebMD will be joining us as our newest neighbor with 700 employees. Hacks Accelerator, which is one of the world's premier accelerator venture capital funds individuals, will be bringing about 2,500 new individuals to Newark. Freshly is doing 400. Their frozen healthy foods will bring in about 400. That is just a sampling of some folks who have committed to New Jersey in 21, and it's been absolutely fascinating. Life science is something that New Jersey has been known for the longest time, and our pipeline is considered of individuals that are expressing interest and individuals who we at Choose are working with to consider New Jersey. Our pipeline is up almost 100% since last year, because I think folks have realized that during this pandemic that the talent and the workforce is something that's vitally important, and that in New Jersey we have it built in, and we actually have our colleagues over at BioNJ put some stats together, and one of the most recent ones, which I think is fascinating, we have over 70 companies in New Jersey that are right now working on some iteration of COVID, be it therapeutics, testing, or the vaccine. And so it's something that we in New Jersey need to be significantly proud of. The tech industry, I think I don't have to express it too much, but I think that the tech industry has definitely boomed during this pandemic as we've all embraced this new virtual world. Some of the new emerging sectors, I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes on. Offshore wind is something that is newer to New Jersey, and this governor has committed to really building out that sector. And so when I first arrived at Choose 3.5 years ago, we had really not one company in the offshore clean energy company here in New Jersey. And now today we have over 40. Ørsted is one of the world-renowned companies, is now going to be calling Newark home, and it just announced several weeks ago their intent to actually build an office there. And so as that office continues to grow, as will much of the offshore wind, and it's an area that I believe truly will rival the life sciences in the next 10 years or so. Film and television, I think those folks that have been pre-pandemic and during the pandemic had a moment to walk around Newark and saw an extra amount of TV cameras and so forth. That is an industry that was once extremely strong in New Jersey and went off to the side as tax credits were not available. But as the tax credits came back, it's been fascinating to see there's a significant uptick. And some of the best movies and TV shows that we're currently watching right now are filmed in our very own Newark and in New Jersey. And while the industry may not have been as active in the last few years, the talent always remained. And we've been so lucky to be just beside New York City and Philadelphia. And so as the sector came back into the New Jersey area, rebuilding that workforce was not as necessary as they were already here. And so it's an area that I think has absolutely boomed recently. And as streaming and more content is required by viewers, I think you will see a significant uptick continue to grow both in the Newark region, the North Jersey area, and New Jersey as a whole. Sports betting and gaming, that is something that is newer to New Jersey, but given that we have such a strong tech talent, that industry is more than just doing some online sports betting. There is a strong back of house tech components, algorithms, engineers, computer scientists that are absolutely all needed. And so you're seeing a big uptick in what I call that tech corridor coming in from the Jersey City side all the way to Newark. And I think those are some of the most emerging areas that will be coming about. I am extremely optimistic in what I see the next couple of months and the next years. I truly believe that New Jersey will come out of this pandemic much stronger than we were coming in. And as international travel resumes, we have a backlog of companies that are international that have expressed interest in entering the U.S. market, and us convincing of New Jersey has always been top of mind. But getting them to see very firsthand of some of the assets and some of the places and some of the communities that we have and what New Jersey has to offer will come to fruition as travel starts to be lifted in the early part of November. And for those folks I know, Choose New Jersey has 2 international offices that literally wake up every morning and sell New Jersey. We have an office in Europe that's based out of Berlin, and we have our second one is in Delhi, representing us in India. And so I believe that our international pipeline is something that has been always strong, but only continues to be stronger. Just 3 years ago, our international pipeline was about 25% of our business attraction, and today it's about 77. And I think as folks internationally really start to look at diversifying and entering the U.S. market, I think New Jersey is really primed to call home. Manufacturing, and I know supply chains will be discussed later, so I won't go too much about it, but we've seen a big increase in those looking to diversify their supply chains. And what we saw during the pandemic were companies whose supply chains were interrupted in the production side because maybe too many of their eggs were put into one basket and putting it all into one region. And so what we're seeing is folks wanting to diversify their locations and their production and their manufacturing, not in large footprints, but to ensure that the portions of their supply chain are not interrupted in any future pandemic or any future disruption. And so we are, and given our proximity to the ports and given our ability to move folks through our rail and our roads, having a presence in New Jersey is something that has been top of mind for many folks, and we've seen an increase in that. And so I do believe that the greater Newark area will absolutely benefit from that. And so I'm absolutely looking forward to hearing my fellow colleagues and panel members and speakers and see what they can contribute to it. But from a Choose New Jersey perspective, we are beyond optimistic, and I truly believe that we will come out of this stronger than before. So Barbara, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing from everyone else today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jose. That certainly starts us off on a high note to hear about all the new companies that are coming in. And I know I, for one, am excited about the two big ones that you've just announced, Hacks and WebMD, coming into Newark, because those really are important things. And we haven't seen much in the way of big companies coming in. So it's very gratifying to hear all the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll hear the labor report. This should be very interesting too. And it's my delight to welcome Leslie Hirsch, who is Assistant Commissioner, Research and Information at the New Jersey Department of Labor. Leslie?
So what we're looking at here are 6.5 million workers in the counties that we've selected. Those arrows going in and out are not directionality. As you can imagine, people aren't 692,000 people are not commuting to Suffolk County. They're just commuting out of that area. So 6.5 million workers in these counties, and 18% of those workers are commuting in from outside the region. 11% of the workers living in the region are commuting out, and that's the 692,000. This is again put together from county data in New York State and New Jersey. What you can see is just under half of employment, this is covered employment in the region, is in these top 4 sectors. These are 2-digit NAICS codes for those of you who like your industry data. That's the North American Industry Classification System. So as we can see, we have the top 2 really are not rateable sectors, but we hear more and more that healthcare and social assistance, particularly healthcare, is the genesis of a lot of life science innovation going on in the region. Educational services, we know we bring in quite a few jobs in education. That's not just K-12, but we're also talking post-secondary education. And then we rely a great deal on retail trade and, no surprise, professional, scientific, and technical services, which is a hodgepodge of advertising, legal, accounting, and so forth. But you can also see a couple of other sort of red flags for us as we know what's happened over the past year and a half, a little bit over a year and a half. Retail trade and accommodation and food services, or hotels and restaurants, have been hit pretty hard, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Your workforce, again, using the exact same region, looking at the American Community Survey, we have about out of everybody who's in the labor force, which is about 7 million people. So you can hear not everybody in the labor force is employed, because I mentioned a lower number earlier of jobs. We have, not surprisingly, the age distribution is, majority of our workforce are in those prime working years, but not an unsubstantial number of workers are in that 55 and over, including myself. We are looking at something in the range of 5 plus 16%, so 21% of our workforce or labor force is over that age. So those are not people, they may be unemployed, but they're not in the labor force. Or why don't I put it without a double negative, they are in the labor force. We're a fairly diverse labor force, with about 40% of our workforce being white, and Latinx refers to anybody of Hispanic origin, regardless of race. So we have 25% of our population, of our labor force is Latinx. This bottom chart is actually one of my favorite charts, and I'll bet you anything that you've not seen it from anyone else, because it's one of the ones that I like to talk about quite a bit. And that is the match between the level of education of our labor force and the level of education required by the jobs we have in our labor market. And so when I talk about those 3 levels, there are the 3 groupings going across the bottom of the screen, which I can't see now because it's covered up. It always happens, doesn't it? All right, I'm trying to pull this up. So the bottom, which a lot of people call low skill, but that's really not true. Lots of jobs that don't require a high school diploma require a good deal of skill in order to get them done efficiently and effectively. But we'll just call that the high school diploma or less. This middle skill often is referred to is the more than a high school diploma, but less than a bachelor's degree. And that includes people with a post-secondary credential, whether it's a degree, an associate degree, or a certificate, and those people who have some college but have not completed a degree. And then bachelor's or more is everything else going up and above. So you can see we're very educated, even more so. I happen to know the state of New Jersey quite well, being from the New Jersey Department of Labor. And we have 50% here of our labor force has a bachelor's degree or more, which is wonderful. And 20% who have more than a high school diploma, and a little bit under 30% who have a high school diploma or less. Unfortunately, it's not entirely matched. And this is something that, why I say this is one of my favorites, because I think it's a real eye-opener for us. We have, of our jobs in the region, and this is the counties in New Jersey that I mentioned earlier before, New York City, Westchester, and Nassau. Under 30% of our jobs require a bachelor's degree or more. Under 6% actually of our jobs require that middle skill level. And those of you who have heard talk about the middle skill gap, I have, been a vociferous person criticizing that. It's really not something that we have a problem with in the New York City area. We are a little bit more like a barbell economy, hollow in the middle, and with the, the sort of two big ends on the end. So we have only 6% of our jobs require, this middle skill area, compared to 20% of the people, and almost 40% of the jobs that require less than a high school diploma or less, compared to 29% of the people. So what does this tell you? There are people who have a bachelor's degree who must be working in one of the other areas if they are in fact employed. So there's this downward pressure, and that means that people who have a high school diploma or less are competing with people who are more educated. I think that hollow in the middle is something that we saw happening from the 60s until recently, with the offshoring of manufacturing, a lot of the skilled trades moving out of our region. At one point, I do recall that New York City had over 900,000 jobs in manufacturing, and I believe that number is somewhere in the range of 70,000 today. So more than 90% of the manufacturing jobs left, and that's where a lot of these used to be, in the middle. Here's an interesting slide. We have access to a web scraping application called Burning Glass, or now it's called MC Burning Glass. So we're able to take a look at who's been advertising for employment lately. And this is the last 3 months. Who are the largest employers? Will come as almost no surprise. I think many of the employer interviews and employer discussions I have are really taken aback by the growth of Amazon. I think we all know, because Amazon is the major e-commerce player, but is a major player in warehousing in New Jersey. Happy to see some of the financial services and professional services jobs coming back as well. But Amazon is really dwarfing the demand from all these other companies. But for the most part, we're really looking at banking or finance. We have a couple that are in the food services industry, like Starbucks and Boston Market, and then a lot of healthcare. And these are, not surprisingly, the top occupations. Interestingly, I would have thought that we would see truck drivers or laborers and freight stock and material movers at the top. But what it seems to be is that Amazon is hiring across a range of occupations. And software developers or application developers, and this computer occupations, all other, those are sort of like business analysts and other things that are not counted among the classification system. That those are what the professional services, finance and insurance, and probably healthcare are also looking for. But they're fairly high level jobs, as you can see. A great deal of them require a lot of education and are fairly high wage. Mixed in with those are also some other ones, like at the bottom, you can see security guards, laborers and freight stock and material movers. And you move your way up, we can also see customer service reps and retail service people. This is taken across those counties again, looking at all the ads that have emanated from employers across those counties in the past 3 months. These are the occupational skills that are most in demand. So interesting, customer service, not surprising, I believe, as I will explain in just a moment. Scheduling, also not surprising given the warehousing presence, in the job ads. Project management, which has been a growing skill, occupational skill for several years now. And that certification is also one that's really associated with a good deal of return on investment in terms of wage gains. Retail industry knowledge. So we're seeing things that I think we know a little bit about the shortage of staff, which we're going to be talking about in just a moment. On the right side are the technology skills. So not surprisingly, we see Excel, PowerPoint, which is the bane of my existence, as you can see, and Outlook, the Microsoft package. But also here are some really interesting things here, like SQL or SQL, Oracle. I'm trying to think what else we have, and Excel are all data analysis and data management tools. And so it's something I've been predicting for quite some time, that the sort of takeover of the data analysts in the workforce, particularly at the professional services and in the finance industry, there really hardly isn't a job these days where you can't just get slapped with a database and asked to give your analysis or give your insight. And it's something that employers across the board have been telling me now for about 10 years, but it's really showing up now. Also, the web development and software development, not surprisingly, Python, Java, JavaScript are near the top. Moving into our recent, rather than looking at snapshots, we're going to look at trends now. And this one is probably self-explanatory. In green is the unemployment rate. And this is also taken from those counties, looking at the total number of people unemployed over the total number of people who are in the labor force, and how that's moved from month to month since 2000. And at the top, we're looking at thousands of jobs for non-farm employment. So not surprisingly, they're mirror images of one another, but you can see the huge disruption that we had from February to April, which is I've got a gray stripe for each of the recessions, the 3 recessions during this period. So we have a spike in unemployment. I don't need to tell anybody about that. And we certainly at Department of Labor know quite a bit about it. We see some of the movement in green on the right side, kind of going up and down as we're, confronting the Delta variant and reopening, and then sort of moving back on the reopening. Unemployment rate is quite a bit down. We're looking for the region overall. It's at the 7.9%, which is pretty much reflecting the oversized importance of the New York City labor market. And you can see that we have not quite gained all the jobs back that we lost. This is because I don't have access to unemployment claims data in New York State. I did want to show you what unemployment claims look like in New Jersey, just to give you a sense. So UI is the regular state unemployment insurance. The PUA, everyone by now is just as familiar with all these acronyms as I am, but the PUA was the one that went to people who did not have a work history that would have had them eligible for unemployment insurance, the typical unemployment insurance, or who were independent contractors. The PEUC was the additional $600 that was paid out. And EB are extended benefits. Those are, at this point, I believe we're all in federal extended benefits. There will be a kick in at one point when those end, and we'll be looking at the end of the year, and we'll be looking at only state extended benefits. So this is a cumulative picture. At the bottom is the UI, and you can see, that made up the largest part originally, but there was a big peak in the PUA payments in early during the pandemic. We can see those payments going up and down and up and down. And honestly, we've all been puzzled quite a bit because of the the way that fraud actually plays a pretty large role in the counting of unemployment insurance claims. Unfortunately, fraud has been rampant, and it's not, individuals who might have been doing this 20, 30, or 40 years ago. These are companies or, they're groups of programmers and hackers who have very sophisticated means of hacking into the unemployment insurance system. And so, we do a lot of correction from week to week. You can see September 4th drop off, this green on the right, it goes all the way down. That's when PEUC ended, and there's a little bit more payments going out to the right, and that's because those payments are coming in late, or people are certifying or getting certified late after the. So that's for unemployment during the period prior to September 4th. I'll repeat that just in case. So the gray, the green, the blue to the right of September 4th are for claims prior to September 4th. This is in a snapshot. I really struggled with this one because I've looked at charts, so many charts this way, and I didn't want to give you a spaghetti chart. So what we're looking at here in blue is the effect on the labor market of COVID pandemic and the shutdowns in order to prevent the spread of the pandemic between February and May. So huge losses we're looking at, lots of, and not surprisingly in leisure and hospitality, we're looking at 475,000 jobs lost. And this is again in that region that I showed you at the beginning. 365,000 jobs lost, trade, transportation, and utilities. Mainly that's retail trade, education and health even lost. And we thought, wow, a lot of us were very surprised to see that. Education, not surprising because of the move to remote education. But what is surprising is that ambulatory care saw, just bled jobs in the early months of the COVID pandemic, even though hospitals were adding jobs. So the net effect here is a tremendous loss. We go down the line and the losses are a little bit less severe. Not surprisingly, a lot of these are in areas, one gentleman here who runs a lumber company. I met him before the presentation. So construction companies didn't lose as much. There's not as much face-to-face work, customer contact. Manufacturing certainly didn't lose as much. Financial activities. A lot of these are office jobs, information, and government. Now you can see that government is the only sector that's lost jobs since May 2020. So there's been a tremendous recovery, very fast. It seems to be slowing down. I think we all had heard last Friday, the US jobs report came out and it was somewhat disappointing. I think there's some concern, and I'm sure Rich talked about this yesterday, about the potential slowdown of the recovery at the same time that we're looking at inflation. I think some people are talking that terrible term from the 70s that I guess I should say, for those of you who are too young to remember, stagflation. But that's only one of many scenarios that we're looking at. And I don't think it's very likely that will happen, because a lot of the inflation right now is not oil caused. It's caused by, supply chain shortages and so forth.
We do need to speed up a little bit because we're at time now.
Okay. Here is just a comparison of the real-time job ads in that region over the first 6 months of 2021 in black. 2020 in black compared to the previous years and this year. So you can just see that job ad activity was way down in 2020. This is what economists call the beverage curve. Generally speaking, the rate of job openings is in inverse proportion to the unemployment rate. So higher the unemployment rate, the lower the job openings rate. Makes a lot of sense. However, you can see this big red line across the top. It seems to be the unemployment rate is not having an effect on the job openings rate. So as the unemployment rate moves down, we see the job openings rate just remain constant. A lot of people are talking about this. And here's the question. I'm going to try to go through this. I'm very good at talking fast, so hopefully you can stay with me because this is really the best part of the presentation. What are the reasons for the shortage of so-called shortage of workers? Why aren't jobs getting filled? Well, for the most part, there's one major reason, and that is there's a mismatch of the skills of available workers to those that are required in available jobs. And as I will say in just a moment, I think it's important to know that what we're talking about, a lot of our available workers were in that low skill or low educational attainment category. So we're talking about high customer contact, shortage of affordable childcare. And as the Delta variant affects many of our school districts, we're seeing that kids are coming home sometimes too now. So the opening of the schools helped, but has not entirely turned the situation around. At the same time, we just do have our childcare workforce is too small and childcare is too expensive. And women have been twice as likely to leave the labor force altogether because of it. Are maybe coming back to now. We're seeing a little bit of movement, but very slowly. That actually is not true. The 50% of adults vaccinated, and I thought I changed that, but I guess not. I'll change it back. It's in New Jersey, at least I can tell you, we're looking at something in the range of 70%. So 50% is true across the US, but in New Jersey, it's much higher. And I assume it's much higher in New York as well. But there's a new risk return calculus. You know, how much am I going to face conditions in the workplace when I'm risking my family's health by going into the workplace? I've heard a couple of really good podcasts. I'm happy to pass those on to you by workers who have left their jobs because they just didn't see it was worth it. People moving during a pandemic, a lot of people moved up to Ulster County, actually. I noticed that in the New York data, and a lot of people moving down into central and southern New Jersey, but the jobs aren't there. And more people over the age of 55 are choosing to retire. This is actually quite important. And Barbara, I would try to speed through the last few here. This is very important. The low-wage jobs were most affected. You can see that huge drop on the blue line in April, and they've not recovered. The question is, will they ever recover? So when we look at what are some of the trends that have been accelerated, technology, certainly taking over areas of where there's workplace density or physical contact. Business travel is depressed, so we're probably going to see a return to luxury travel or personal travel, but business travel is definitely way down. Adoption of automation and e-commerce, which is not surprising, grew, and it grew in the US 3.3 times faster last year than the year before. Oh, I seem to have missed something. Okay, so how do we address the policy changes that will shape the labor market of the future? I think I missed a slide in here that was about low-wage workers and what was happening with them. I think over the next several years, we're really looking at the jobs that will be coming back are jobs that are more on the high wage level. Jobs that won't be coming back are more on the low wage level. Women are disproportionately affected by that, as are Latinx and Black workers. And a lot of that has to do with the type of occupations people choose, but a lot of it has to do with inequity in terms of educational attainment. And so that's where I'm going with this last one. How we make choices now will affect the long-term labor market. And the choices that I have listed here, these are editorial choices of my own. I get to do that in my position. So I'm going to say, I think unless we close attainment gaps in education, we're going to see some, the same thing happening with people of color, immigrants, and women being disproportionately affected by job loss. We need to do a lot better at short-term availability of reskilling and upskilling. And my boss, the commissioner, likes to talk about it as FEMA of education. We have a FEMA for disasters, and we need a FEMA for education. Closing the digital divide, because a lot of the skills that are in demand are high digital technology, or quality childcare speaks for itself. And then, of course, what we do around fuel dependency and climate resiliency will certainly have an effect. Storms, have been having a tremendous effect on the labor market and on supply chain. The supply chain itself, we need to be, although not in Newark and Elizabeth so much, there's been supply chain disruptions that we'll be hearing about. But onshoring and stabilizing the supply chain so that we can confront future disasters is certainly a piece of the puzzle. And I have a very quick slide that I won't speak to, but because we're about to have a panel on it, and I'm sorry, Barbara, for going over, but these are some of the reasons why I think we've been facing supply chain disruptions. And I was told this morning that the price of moving a container used to be $1,000 in 2019, and now is in the $20,000 to $30,000 range because of the shortage of containers in particular, and because of the log jams that are happening along the coast in Savannah and certainly on the West Coast. Thank you.
Wonderful. Leslie, thank you so much. That was a lot of information packed in. Leslie has agreed to make her presentation available after the program. So you'll be able to go over the slides, and I'm sure she'll be available to answer questions after the program if you have any. We're now going to move into the topic of the day, which is supply chain. And I'm going to invite Kevin Lyons, Matt Kukin, and Beth Ann Rooney to turn on their cameras. We're going to start with Kevin Lyons, and then I'll come back to introduce Matt and then Beth Ann.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Due to our schedule, I literally cut my presentation in half. So I'll only be on here for about 3 to 4 minutes. So this way, you really want to hear from Matthew and Beth Ann. They have some really good information. So thank Barbara, Maya, and Chip. What I'm going to focus on is just real quick, 4 key areas of trends and research that I'm looking at. Leslie just mentioned a few things, and that is in my research, I look at how risk and resilience happens within supply chains. But more specifically, I look at climate and climate impacts as one of those things. The other thing I'll talk about real quickly is social impacts within the supply chain, looking at economic development as a result around this idea that can we recover, but recover in a way that also includes minority-owned and women-owned businesses. And then I'll kind of wrap up a little bit with just some purposeful projects that we're working on. So, you know, risk and resilience as it relates to climate is one of those areas that we spend a considerable amount of time in. It has impacted the supply chain in many different ways, especially if you're in the agriculture or any of the areas of business sector that are heavily impacted by droughts or over rain and fires and such. So what I've been doing is tracking that for over a period of time, just to make sure that the supply chains are resilient enough. Do we have backup systems, whether they're local or whether they're global, to combat? So we're now actually in this part of the supply chain where we're starting to talk about adaptability to the weather and the way things are changing in our climate. So that's something that we're going to continue to follow and trend and produce some trends and some reports out about that in the very near future. The next thing I want to talk about is disparities within the supply chain. You know, I know that everyone wants to get back to work. Everyone wants to, you know, break up the log jams that are happening in supply chains. But at the same time, I have to think about how is this going to be done equitably and making sure that all sectors and all folks that are participating in the economy, our small businesses, our women-owned businesses, and our diverse-owned businesses are able to participate in that strong comeback. So I've been doing a series of disparity studies just to make sure that everyone knows that these businesses are ready, they're willing, and they can participate fully in our procurement and supply chain activity. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there are a series of studies that I have that you can look up. The most recent one that we did has been for the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. We were looking at disparity as it surrounds itself around this offshore wind. I know that's a huge area for the state of New Jersey, but again, I want to make sure that our women and minority-owned businesses are fully participating in that upswing in renewable energy. And the last thing I'll talk about real fast is this purposeful sourcing of local suppliers. You know, supply chain is a global entity, and that's not going to go away. However, we can start to really look at our local capacity. And so I've been working in various cities where we look at large institutions and where do they conduct their business. And so in Newark and Jersey City and other places where I've been doing this work, it's very important for us not to forget that we have local capacity to satisfy our supply chains, and those should be seriously considered as we move forward. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let Matthew and Beth Ann take it from here.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Matt, it's all yours now.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Good morning. Thanks to NRBP for having me on the panel today as well. Kevin, thank you for that setup. I am Matt Kukin. My company is a fourth generation owned and operated building materials company. We have 9 locations in New Jersey and New York. We have just over 300 employees and roughly 80 trucks on the road every day delivering building materials to our customers. Speaking of local, we recently opened a 10-acre distribution center here in Newark on Doremus Avenue, where we have really great access to the major roadways. We have a rail spur here on site, as well as commercial waterfront on Newark Bay, which we're in the process of rebuilding in hopes of utilizing the water as a means to move product in the future. The site was previously a processing plant, which you can see just over my shoulder here. However, it's been since redeveloped, and I'd welcome you all to check out that transformation from the video that we have on our website. As we've all experienced in one way or another, the supply chain has really been put to task by the COVID pandemic. Lumber and building materials have been particularly challenged. And so I'll share with you my experience through the pandemic, as well as where I see some things going. So the quick backdrop, before COVID hit in early 2020, lumber mills across the country had already gone into production curtailment due to below average price of lumber products. And mills curtailing production in that environment is fairly routine. It allows demand to catch up with supply and thereby bring their prices back into parity. So then once COVID really bared down in March and April, as you may recall, the early predictions were that we were about to fall into a massive economic slowdown. And so the lumber mills all but killed production for fear of that pending slowdown in construction. Well, that didn't happen. And in fact, construction, as we knew, took off and demand for building materials and construction services skyrocketed. Some of the reasons for that were, as we know, people were working from home. There were many DIY projects and home projects. There was a significant exodus from many of the urban centers around the country into suburban markets. And typically when homes turn over to new owners, those new owners engage in some sort of a renovation project. And this all really spurred a suburban real estate frenzy that everyone was also familiar with, which caused existing home valuations to climb rapidly. And with interest rates being at historical lows, that scenario freed up a significant amount of home equity for homeowners. And so a large amount of cash was readily and cheaply available for these renovation projects. And additionally, as we know, people weren't spending money on other things. And as well, there was a bit of a surge in household income due in part to stimulus. So already low on supply, lumber mills around the US and Canada tried to respond to this new demand. But at that time, in the spring of 2020, the COVID work restrictions really prohibited them from ramping up shift work, as well as waves of localized outbreaks continue to inhibit their ability to produce. All of these production constraints alone, frankly, would have been enough to disrupt our supply chain. However, what then happened in the summer, fall, and the spring of, or the winter rather, of 2020 and 21 further really challenged us. So just as construction took off last summer, record forest fires destroyed millions of acres of timberland in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia, which is our industry's primary source of softwood lumber for construction. So this created not only a delay in accessing the timber to be harvested as fires were fought and controlled, but also a significant dearth of timber was then available for harvest. And the timber salvaged from forest fires has a very low yield. And then on the heels of those fires came the Gulf storms later that year in 2020, as well as the big Texas freeze in 2021 in February. And so then the damage that was caused by these storms really not only created significant demand on building materials for reconstruction purposes, but also impacted important downstream manufacturing and chemical production from the region, most notably a chemical called MDI, which is a resin that's used in the manufacturing a lot of products such as OSB and plywood, engineered lumber, foam insulation, excuse me, and foam insulation. And finally, we have very serious transportation issues and labor issues, both as the cause of and from the impact of these supply chain issues. Trucking demand currently far outpaces supply of trucks and drivers nationally. And I suspect Beth Rooney may discuss next, our ports are under significant pressure. And with so many cargo ships stalled offshore, this issue is really only going to get worse as we need to get trucks under those containers to get them into the market. As of labor, everyone is struggling to find people. Mills and manufacturers can't produce because they can't get people, whether that's due to continued outbreaks, fear of going to work, losing people to other industries. Production therefore continues to suffer. And these issues are really continuing to produce significant lead times for virtually all manufactured products in our industry, such as windows, doors, and other millwork products. So what's been the impact of all of these issues on lumber prices, since everyone suddenly is very interested in the lumber markets? The lumber composite price index averaged $356 per 1,000 board feet in 2019. That price shot up to $1,000 per 1,000 board feet by September of 2020. It receded a bit and it went on a tear month over month to $1,700 per 1,000 board feet, which meant lumber was selling for over 4 times the price of the year prior. It's currently somewhat back to normal, but we'll see. So from a customer facing perspective, Kukin Brothers really works hard to keep the complexities of our supply chain simple and seamless. We have an experienced team of buyers in our purchasing and logistics department who work directly with our mills out west to keep inventory rolling in and the cost of freight competitive. Because of those strong relationships, much of our lumber comes directly to us by rail into New Jersey and New York. Suffice it to say, this has really been a very interesting year for us. But I hope this gives you at least some context for the complexity of the lumber and building material supply chain, as well as an understanding of what contributed to some of the historical run-up in prices. Going forward, I think there will be some improvements with respect to mill capacity through technology and advancement, automation. I think trucking is going to remain an issue. I've been asked recently, what would an improved supply chain look like for our industry? There are a number of things that come to mind. However, I'll mention one in particular, and that would be a greater utilization of our local waterways. And I think I'll tee up that discussion for Beth from Port Newark in her upcoming presentation. And I thank you all for your time today. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Matt. It was a great follow-up to what Kevin was talking about and a great segue to Beth Ann's comments. Beth Ann Rooney is Deputy Port Director for Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And I neglected to give Matt Kukin's title, which is VP of Operations at Kukin Brothers. Beth Ann?
Great. Well, thank you, Barbara. And I hope everyone, can you see the screen that I'm showing?
Yes, you should just take your slides full screen.
Excellent. I think we're good. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here again with you. It is my pleasure. I think when Barbara first asked us to be on this panel on supply chain, it was not nearly in as much of the news as it is today. And certainly just in the last 4 or 5 days, the amount of times that we're hearing about the supply chain in all of the national news networks, whether it's TV, print, or radio, you can't turn your eyes to a news outlet without hearing about it. But let me just show you for a moment what has actually been happening in the Port of New York and New Jersey. If you look at the lines on this graph that are purple, black, let's say orange and green, you can see that the port typically has a seasonality to it. And year after year, regardless of what our container volumes had been, the trends were the same each year. And that is what we consider an early part of the year, January, February, March timeframe is what we call, the Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year timeframe. And then we go into what is a restocking season. And then we go into Christmas. And Christmas typically in the port starts in June. And if you don't have your goods in the port by early September, mid-September, then they're not making it onto the shelves for Christmas. And then following Christmas in the port in September, October, November, December are generally a lull. Now, if you look at what happened last year in 2020, you see that volumes just dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped precipitously going into June. And this drop in April, May, and June of 2020 is all directly correlated with the fact that production overseas was shut down in the February, March, April timeframe. And then it takes, another, 30 to 60 days to get from the factory to the foreign port and then to the port of New York and New Jersey. And then we saw this huge increase between June and August, and we continued to grow. And then we leveled out in what is our typical, end of Christmas lull. And then we got into 2021, and it has been just this jigsaw of up and down activity. And what we've been seeing is differences on a month-to-month basis of anywhere from 15% to 50%, 50. And it is all of this uncertainty in the supply chain that is so difficult to manage. So if you look, as I'm talking about this, if you look at these differences on a month-to-month basis, overall, at the end of the day, we are up almost 30% year over year. And that's the same with the ports of Los Angeles and ports of Long Beach. They too are up 30% year over year. The challenge in handling that 30% is that the port facilities, or at least the port facilities here in New York, New Jersey, have the capacity to handle that 30% increase. The challenge is that the rest of the supply chain, when the cargo leaves our facilities, does not have the capacity to handle such a dramatic increase in cargo in a short period of time. So the trucking capacity, the truck drivers, the chassis that the containers go on, the warehouse and distribution space that the cargo goes to, the workers in the warehouse and distribution space, the rail cars, the rail track, the rail workers. And then once the cargo gets to the warehouse and distribution space, the trucks and truck drivers who will bring the cargo to the retail center or to the Amazon fulfillment centers, all have not had the time and the opportunity to increase their capacity by 30% in order to handle this volume. And that's precisely why the supply chain is so challenged. Unlike the West Coast ports and South Atlantic ports, the Port of New York and New Jersey has not had ships sitting at anchor for long periods of time or large numbers of ships sitting at anchor. And again, that's because our terminals have the capacity to handle that volume. So we today, right now, have just 3 ships at anchor, and we are averaging just year to date 1.48 days at anchor, as compared to 60 ships that are sitting off coast in Southern California right now, and another 24, 25 ships that are sitting off the coast in the South Atlantic right now. What do we see moving forward is that cargo, and I'll tell you that this forecast of our volume through 2025 was generated, I'd say, about 6 to 8 weeks ago. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to see different from what is on here. So that's how quickly things are changing. But we're expecting that we're going to finish this year probably between 8.8 and 8.9 million TEUs. That's 1.3 million units more than last year. We typically see, on average, 2 to 2.5% growth. We're going to be, in plus 20% growth year after year, year over year, rather. We expect all indications. We're talking to ocean carriers now. We're talking to shippers, all of the brand names that you're familiar with. We're talking to all of them now, and they are expecting that we're going to be in this peak activity at least through the first half of 2022, if not through the entire year. After that, we would expect that we would see a decrease in cargo and then an evening out where we'll see more, we'll get back to that 2 to 3% compound annual growth that we're used to seeing on an annual basis. So in short, look, we are not without our challenges here in the port, despite all of this volume. Cargo is moving. We are moving over 16,000 units per day. Our terminals are extending hours of operation, operating on holidays and on weekends, particularly Saturdays, in order to accommodate the volume. The challenge, as you've been hearing, I'm sure, in the media, the warehouses and distribution space, for as much space that we have in the region, the space is filled to the rafters in many cases, and the product is not getting out of the warehouses to the retail spaces and to the fulfillment centers quickly enough. So some of that is a workforce issue. So certainly, important to see, from the Department of Labor in terms of, where those jobs are and getting those folks, back to work. But the cargo, is here. I know there's been a lot of talk about Christmas has to be canceled because the supply chain's, not moving. But, as I said, Christmas is typically here by middle of September. So, I think the message that we're telling everybody certainly is do your holiday shopping early, because if you wait until just before the holidays to start your shopping, you will have probably quite a bit of difficulty finding the holiday, and winter goods, because shippers right now are also preparing for another global shutdown in manufacturing. And in fact, in Vietnam, as we speak, more than 80% of the factories are shut down due to another COVID outbreak, and they don't expect to ramp up to full production until the middle of January. So because we haven't fully gotten our arms around the pandemic yet globally, there is a fear that production will shut down around the world at various times and in various places. And as a result, shippers have moved from a just-in-time inventory basis to a just-in-case inventory basis, and they're stockpiling whatever they can in case that production shuts down. So, it's been an interesting ride for the last 18, 19 months. I would expect that we're going to be on a similar ride, for another 8 to 10 months at a minimum. But I'm very proud of the work that the entire Port of New York and New Jersey and the supply chain community has done to keep moving the cargo in spite of all of the challenges that we've had. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Very good to hear that there is a bright side to this, because there's certainly a lot of challenges you mentioned. We need to move to the next group. Thank you to the supply chain speakers. We're going to banking and insurance now, and I'd like to welcome David Andrew, who is Senior Vice President of Emerging Strategy Leader at Marsh. David, and I will be turning my camera back on when you're close to your time.
Good morning, Barbara. Thank you. The NRBP's Economic Forum is always one of the highlights of the year. I'm pleased to be able to serve on the panel and share my thoughts on risk and insurance. As I prepared for today's conversation, I could not help but remember a meeting I attended a few years ago. It was an NRBP board meeting, and it was at the end of the year. We all went around the room and each spoke of what we looked forward to in the new year. We also mentioned some of the challenges that we would face. As it came to my turn, I jokingly said, "Do you really want to hear the doom and gloom from the insurance executive?" We all had a good chuckle. And then I proceeded to talk about supply chain disruption and climate. Little did I know the magnitude of what was about to unfold. I'm encouraged by what I've heard over these past 2 days. I think the key is to hope for the best, but plan for the disruption. That being said, I plan to focus on 3 themes today. First, cybersecurity. Second, megastorms. And lastly, insurance pricing trends. More than ever before, cyber defense strategies matter to individuals and organizations. Most of us are aware of the strike against Colonial Pipeline. They paid hackers $4.4 million in ransom. Also, JBS Beef Supply paid $11 million in ransom. Ransomware increasingly seems to be the weapon of choice. US companies are paying 400% more in ransom payouts in 2021 compared to 2019. The average cost of a ransomware attack is a staggering $1.8 million. It is interesting to note over 90% of breaches are a result of human behavior. A quick tip: alert accounts payable and other departments to double check emails that come into your organizations. Criminals are monitoring the email traffic of your vendors and waiting for the perfect moment to send their email with their payment instructions and wiring instructions. They transpose letters in the email address. So instead of Mary@abccorporation.com, it will come through as Mary@acbcorporation.com. What is the solution? At Marsh McLennan, we help our clients understand, measure, and manage their cyber risk. We do that through innovative insurance, end-to-end incident management, risk intelligence, and resilience engineering. Continuing on, megastorms. Since 1980, there have been 290 natural disasters in the United States, costing more than $1 billion each. In total, these super disasters have caused more than 1.9 trillion in damages. In 2020 alone, there were 22 separate billion-dollar disasters across the United States, more than triple the historical average of 7.1. Some believe that this activity is caused by higher temperatures. Some studies show Earth's average surface temperature has risen about 1.62 degrees since the late 1800s. Also, changing oceans. NASA climate scientists report that oceans have absorbed much of the increased atmospheric heat, showing increased temperatures since 1969. Then there's extreme rain events. According to studies, the frequency of extreme one-day rainfall events are increasing, with 9 of the top 10 record rainfall years occurring since 1980. There was a recent article that discussed what sea level rise will do to famous American sites. It was fascinating to see how sites like the Santa Monica Pier would be affected. So what is the solution? First, we have to think ahead to the next event. Take the opportunity to do a diagnostic or a deep review of your insurance coverage, and then go over your business continuity and crisis management plans. Have a tabletop exercise that goes through different what-if scenarios for other catastrophes, and then sit down and understand what are the triggers for a potential loss, and then agree on those loss measurements. Identify what information you would need before and after the event, and then assess the effectiveness. My last topic is insurance pricing and trends. It is important to note that the global insurance prices have 15 consecutive quarters of increases. That is according to the Marsh Global Insurance Index. In the US, prices rose by 56%. It is also important to note that the average rate of increase have slowed for the 3rd consecutive quarter and appears to have plateaued. See, it's not all doom and gloom. There is encouraging news. As we plan for the future, the only reasonable solution is to respect and heed the warning signs and begin to adjust business practices and risk management solutions to account for these seismic changes. Again, the key is to hope for the best, but plan for the disruption. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, David. That was really a good perspective for all of us to be aware of the coverage that we have and to be mindful that these things are happening. How do we anticipate and deal with them? It's now my pleasure to introduce Martin Malelli, who's Market President of TD Bank. And as I mentioned earlier in the program, we're very grateful to TD Bank for being the sponsor of this series. Martin?
Thanks, Barbara. You know, before I start, I just want to say thank you to all the other speakers today. absolutely fantastic and interesting conversations. So I appreciate, took a lot of notes today, so hopefully all the rest of you have as well. You know, certainly the pandemic has caused all of us to shift the way we do business. And frankly, banking is no different. We've had to learn to operate and function differently. And I think some of the changes that we've seen in banking are kind of probably be here to stay. In the short term, the biggest disruptor for the banking industry has been the PPP loan program, or the Paycheck Protection Program. First and foremost, I want to say how proud I am of our TD colleagues. We were able to pivot and create a PPP system and process in 3 days that would normally have taken several months or even longer. Folks, almost 80,000 people around the globe learned overnight how to do a new job. We all became processors and worked 14-hour days for several months. In the end, as Scott Beresford mentioned in his opening comments, we ended up helping about 131,000 customers with the PPP loans, totaling about $12 billion. But the PPP forgiveness isn't quite done yet. We're about halfway through. The first round is all done. Those are forgiven at this point. But the second round, the forgiveness is in process. So one thing to be aware of, under SBA rules, it states that if a PPP loan is paid off before you apply for forgiveness, it is no longer eligible for forgiveness. So there's a lot of people sitting on cash right now. Do not be tempted to use that to pay that loan off. Use it for what the program was originally intended for. Now, there are no silver linings in the pandemic, but there are some opportunities. And we've all adjusted to working from home, at least on the commercial side of TD Bank. And one of the benefits of working from home is we do have more time to reach out to our customers and have more deeper, productive conversations with them. We're using Zoom, WebEx, even the phone, you know, that antiquated piece of equipment. But we are also scheduling, instead of quarterly meetings with our customers, we're all scheduling monthly or sometimes even weekly conversations. So this increased interaction has certainly been critical to both the customers and the bankers in order to navigate over the last 18 months. And we've come to appreciate and expect this increased interaction. I don't think that's going to change. At least I hope not. In fact, I think the customers and the bankers I work with have expressed a desire to have this cadence, if you will, continue. Another change is in the digital banking space. A lot of companies had embraced the digital era, or at least were in the process of it. And with the pandemic, they've had to fast track it. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, but you know, many have converted to a full digital platform at this point over the last, say, year or so. Most customers now, larger customers, are using the full range of treasury management products, such as remote deposit, batch ACH, e-billing, which is something that's new out there for us at least, and positive pay for fraud prevention, as you just heard from our insurance person. This has allowed us to become even more efficient and devote time to growing their business. These were things that the customers always intended to do someday, but you know, someday is now, and so I think that's also here to stay. You know, it kind of brings us over to the branches. You know, do we still need bank branches? I would say yes, I hope so, but every bank model is different. Overall, I think the answer is yes, though. They're definitely changing the way they look. Now they're 1,000 square feet or less, as opposed to 2,000 square feet or more. They have smart ATMs that take deposits and give out various denominations of cash. Going forward, you'll see lower staff levels, unfortunately, but the folks that are there will be better trained. They're higher skilled employees that go beyond just handling transactions. And then you'll also see many branches that have multi-purpose spaces. You've seen the commercials with a competitor, which I won't name, that has cafes. We also have incorporated community conference rooms in all of our newer branches that can be used by local businesses and nonprofits, free of charge, by the way. Studies show that customers want to see the physical branch. It instills confidence and it represents stability. Bottom line is you'll see less branches, They'll be smaller and look different, but I think they're here to stay. Probably the biggest change in banking during the pandemic, though, has been getting a loan. And can you still get one? How do banks continue to provide capital in this environment? In short, it's hard, but we do need to make loans. After all, that's our business, and that's how we make money. However, we are a regulated industry, and we need to be right about 98% of the time, meaning we need to collect about 98% of the money that we put out on the street to get paid back on a timely basis. Otherwise, we can't stay in business. Not a whole lot of room for error there. So during the pandemic, we've leveraged a couple of different sources. We're looking at the SBA and the EDA, working with them hand in hand. They offer low long-term rates and they'll guarantee a portion of the loan to the bank. But how we look at the loans today is we start off with the pre-COVID financial results. We look at the project and say, did it work before COVID? Well, the truth is, if it worked before COVID and you qualified for that loan, you should be able to qualify for it now. We'll look at the projections, we'll sensitize them, but one of the issues we're facing right now, frankly, is the PPP loans themselves. Have they been forgiven? Will they be forgiven? There hasn't been any government guidance on this as of yet. Don't really expect it. And frankly, each of the CPAs that we speak to handle them differently. Sometimes we'll treat them as a loan, the loan as income. Sometimes we treat it as a decrease in expenses. But this is a one-time situation. As long as the business is generally back on track, or at least has a plan to get there, we should be able to work with them. In the real estate sector, we've seen, we've been forced to do lower loan to values across the board. It's just the fact is that we just don't know what the value of properties are going to be going forward. Generally, office and retail space is down. Industrial, warehouse, and medical space is way up. And credit tenant properties such as like a CVS or a Dollar General are very high right now. So it may not make sense for all of us to be in those. But sometimes to get over the hump will require a cash reserve, some payments. But in most cases, we are getting personal guarantees, which help us a lot. Just in closing, a couple of quick things. Some industries that have done pretty well, or at least have been affected the least, and you've heard about it today. Warehousing is done extremely well. Believe it or not, pest control, cleaning supply companies, the food industry has done very well. Medical, obviously, and the construction companies have done well as long as they can get their supplies. And if they have government contracts, it's done well. Industries that have not done so great: restaurants, performing arts, car dealerships, healthcare, clubs, and daycares. But again, it's hard to lend money right now. It's hard to get a loan, but we do treat all bankers, treat each one as an individual, and we try to work through. And very lastly, just some final observations on banking in general right now, some trends I see. Deposits continue to be at a record high. Short-term borrowings very low. Interest rates are at historic lows, so it's still a good time to get a loan, if you need it. Just like everyone else, we can't find enough employees. We've increased salaries. We're giving sign-on bonuses, but we just can't get folks to work. For the most part, company financials are coming in better than expected. They're downsized, but they've become more efficient. And overall, rental collection rates do remain strong. So we're cautiously optimistic. And like I said, we're here to make loans. So we appreciate everything as a banker. Anything you can do to start that project, we're here to help you. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Martin. All of the panels have been really terrific and so much information and content. We are running a little bit long, so we hope all of you can stay with us for the final two conversations. I'm going to introduce Nicholas Peterson, who's Vice President of Corporate and Regulatory Affairs and Privacy at Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, for his comments, and then I'll come back to introduce the final speaker before I bring Chip up to close the program. Nicholas?
Sure. Hope everyone can hear me, and thanks, Barbara. As Barbara noted, my name is Nick Peterson. I have the pleasure of managing Horizon's regulatory affairs and health policy functions. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you this morning. When approached by Barbara to discuss what's trending in health insurance and health services, I immediately thought of two important subjects and timely subjects. One, coverage affordability, and another one, raising health equity. Two subjects that are all the more important to ensure there's accessible, affordable coverage coming out of the pandemic, though I'm not sure coming out is really the right word. Recognizing that time is limited and that I'm standing in front of each of you getting on with your busy day, I'll try to make this really quick. First, I want to emphasize how critically important it is for the payer community and companies like Horizon to ensure that coverage is not only accessible, but affordable to our members. The pandemic has exacerbated the need to ensure we are reaching individuals across the state. And, we're very proud and excited that so many of the regulators and lawmakers and policy leaders have really taken action on this point. Right here in New Jersey, we've seen Commissioner Marlene Purede and the Murphy administration promote coverage affordability through enhanced subsidies on Get Covered NJ. Washington similarly chipped in by affording full COBRA subsidies for those that were financially displaced by the pandemic, and we had not seen that happen since the 2008 recession. A key part of the conversation is now, how do we keep that going? How do we ensure that we keep more people enrolled in health coverage? How do we make sure that the coverage they have is meaningful? And by meaningful, I mean free of the kinds of high deductibles that we might have gotten used to. Is there a way to somehow tamp down the cost of overall healthcare so that the underlying services are in fact more affordable, and maybe deductibles can come down, maybe premium costs can come down? And the budget reconciliation package under discussion in Congress is examining some of those. For example, say drug pricing reform happens to be an active area that's under discussion with the House Ways and Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means Committee. Not sure if we'll make it into the final $3.5 trillion, or perhaps more realistically, $2 trillion package. But if passed, it would empower the federal government to directly negotiate with pharmaceutical companies on high-cost drugs, particularly drugs that the federal government might be spending a tremendous amount of money on for their Medicare beneficiaries, and to pass those savings on to the private sector. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition and to what degree cost savings might be achieved. But knowing that drugs are in fact the highest driver of our healthcare costs right now, an important area for consideration. Another thing that's happening right here in state government is the examination of something called the healthcare cost benchmark. We saw similar measures in other states like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, but looking at opportunities to bring together stakeholders, whether it be hospitals, health insurers, large provider groups, manufacturers, to jointly agree to reduce the growth of medical costs. Medical inflation tends to be in the neighborhood of 6 to 8% annually, certainly much higher than what we're used to seeing on the CPI side. Clearly, that type of rate of increase is untenable when you think about the rising cost of premium, when you think about the rising cost of deductibles, all those types of things that impact so many. Medical bankruptcy continues to be the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States. So, as you think about all of that, the cost growth benchmark groups that are government-led are intended to bring that number down to something like 3 to 4%. We've seen Massachusetts attack it at around 3.2. Can we do the same in New Jersey? Can we get enough people to support that type of a challenge? And that's something we're closely watching and supporting. So moving off of affordability, I'll get to the last topic here so we can try to wrap up earlier. So I want to spend a few minutes discussing health equity. This came up in time and time again in today's discussion as part of economic recovery to do so in an equitable manner. And, the focus on equity is also a key part in healthcare coverage and healthcare services that are being delivered to individuals throughout the state. Horizon has not been a stranger to these concepts. In 2018, we launched something called Horizon Neighbors in Health, where we provided a number of grants to community health organizations, particularly in urban communities in Newark, Elizabeth, Patterson, elsewhere throughout the state, to ensure that community organizations were empowered to get out and reach their citizens, whether it be to get them to health screenings or simply provide transportation to their doctor's appointment, addressing the kinds of barriers that we see to good health outcome because of perhaps social inequities or economic inequities, prohibiting them from obtaining that successful health outcome. We're looking to continue that trend on our own, but we're also seeing is now intense focus from government to promote those types of actions and promote companies like Verizon who take those actions. We are seeing federal government now engage a third-party consultant called RAND Corporation. They recently published a report noting the kind of statistics that perhaps Medicare should begin collecting, whether it be language barrier, transportation barrier, right? All those types of corollary outcomes of social and economic inequities, and see how health insurers are doing on overall health outcome for individuals that suffer from any one of those cohorts. Are we doing worse or better year over year in addressing people with those kinds of problems? And should we be reimbursed differently based on how well we manage those types of outcomes? So more to come on that, clearly on the early stages, but I'm happy to say that there's intense focus on this area. And we as an industry are highly encouraged to continue to monitor and promote opportunities to reduce those types of inequities. So that's all I had planned for this morning. Happy to answer any questions. Barbara, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Nick. And for the audience, again, if you have a question, you can put it into the Q&A. And Nick, if you can just check that if we do get a question. I'm now delighted to introduce our final speaker for today before Chip closes. And Ashwini Dumaswala is Executive Director, Consumer Initiated Testing and Sports Diagnostics at Quest Diagnostics. Ashwini, it's my pleasure to introduce you, and Chip will come back to close the program. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. As Barbara mentioned, I lead our consumer-initiated testing business here at Quest Diagnostics, and that business is primarily made up of Quest Direct. And I'm very excited to share insights around the consumer, telehealth, and how consumers are engaging with health. So during the pandemic, we saw a 70% decrease in doctor's visits. And a recent Forbes article cited a survey where physicians interviewed at the end of 2020 agreed or strongly agreed that telehealth enabled better preventative care and chronic care management. So COVID has really changed how consumers interact with digital and e-commerce. And I'd like to reinforce something that Leslie mentioned earlier in her presentation. There has been an acceleration in e-commerce adoption. It took 10 years for e-commerce to increase more than 10 percentage points. And in an 8-week period during the height of the pandemic, it increased a further 11 percentage points. So when it comes to consumer engagement in healthcare, we are seeing clear trends, and consumers are bringing their online experience into healthcare. Consumers are increasingly informed and engaged, and they expect a high level of convenience, transparency, and choice. And they're bringing the same expectations around digital engagement that they have in any other channel to healthcare. So when you think about how a consumer engages with Amazon or Zappos, they're expecting the same type of engagement, the same type of convenient, transparent engagement with healthcare. They desire more accessible channels and locations. And most importantly, our consumers want to be empowered to make important decisions about their health and well-being. And this is really the power of consumer-initiated testing, like our Quest Direct offering. It allows consumers to take control of their health by ordering their own lab tests to better understand their health through personal diagnostics. And consumers, they're seeking additional sources of information for support, and they're showing agency and engagement. So in a 2020 Deloitte survey, 46% of consumers felt that they received the information they needed from their virtual health visit. And this is up from just 2 years prior. 2 years prior, the number was 34%. And about 30 to 50% of consumers are comfortable using an at-home diagnostic to diagnose infections before even going to their doctor. So a consumer's relationship with primary care is changing. 78% of consumers report having an established relationship with their physician, and this is down from 82% in 2015 and 87% in 2011. And I'm sure we all know someone who doesn't have a primary care physician. I mean, take my son, for example. He's 22 years old, and no matter how much I chase him, a relationship with a single primary care physician, it's not a priority for him. And, you know, it's not a priority for him, yet his healthcare is, and he has his healthcare needs met on demand when and where he needs. In a 2021 McKinsey Consumer Health Insights Survey, nearly 5 out of 10, or about 47% of consumers, reported an increased focus on wellness due to the pandemic. Sleep and health were the overall priorities, and 1 out of 4 consumers indicated that they wanted support from an app. COVID has really mainstreamed telehealth, and it's not just a shelter-in-place phenomenon. Telehealth usage went from 8% in 2019 to nearly 50% by the summer of 2020. And more importantly, the majority of those people who tried telehealth reported liking it. And 80% of people think that telehealth is here to stay beyond the pandemic. Now, I will say that we've all seen the headlines, we've all seen the publications in the press, and earlier this year, we did see a decrease in telehealth utilization. But the increase in telehealth utilization in 2020 was so great that even the decreases that we've seen this year, they don't mean a return to 2019 levels. You know, factors such as increased accessibility through online and even offline channels are driving awareness. And we've seen companies like Walgreens, CVS, Walmart getting involved in consumer healthcare. Another interesting dynamic, and I'll just touch on it briefly around telehealth, is around health plans. And they're now covering consumer-initiated testing for COVID-19. Pre-pandemic, we would never have imagined that a health plan would pay for a consumer-initiated test or something initiated digitally. Laws and regulations were relaxed under the pandemic, and that's permitting greater flexibility for providers. And some of these regulations are here to stay. So during the pandemic, several states changed laws or policies to require coverage of telemedicine services. And this isn't just a video call, but also audio-only services. So restrictions on out-of-state physicians treating patients via telehealth, we saw them starting to be relaxed during the pandemic. And I mentioned convenience, transparency, and choice, but consumers, they also want to know that they can trust their provider, especially when it comes to healthcare and their results. Telehealth allows us to access experts across the country. And employers are recognizing that employees are consumers as well, and they want the same convenience, transparency, trust, and choice when it comes to their healthcare. Businesses are recognizing this, and Quest, for example, we have several employer programs tailored towards small, mid-size, and large employers to provide testing and services for their employees, including programs through Quest Direct. So what does this all mean? It means that telehealth is here to stay. Consumers, they're no longer one-dimensional, and each and every one of us is a consumer. Consumers want convenience, transparency, and choice, and more organizations are starting to put the consumer first and delivering against these needs. The pandemic has caused a lot of uncertainty, and our relationship as consumers with healthcare is shifting. So, Barbara, that's all I have. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share that information today. It's a topic I'm very excited about. And if you have any questions, I'm more than willing to answer them. And please feel free to follow up with me even after the call.
Sweetie, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And the telehealth trend and consumer-initiated tests certainly make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And the fact that they're growing in so many ways obviously presents lots of opportunity for people to improve their health and for us to take care of ourselves in a much smarter way than we ever have before. Excuse me. So with that, I have to say that this has been one of the most informative regional economic outlooks that I think we've ever had. We did run a little over, but we held more than 75% of the audience here throughout the program, and that's a testament to you, the presenters. Thank you very much, as well as our members wanting to be very well informed about trends and things they need to be aware of in the year ahead. We got some very intense information in some cases and very practical information in others that we think our members can act on. And I know I took a lot of notes, as David said before, and we'll use those notes as we go forward and plan our activities for the year for our members. So thank you to all of our speakers today. Thank you to our members for taking advantage of this and supporting us throughout the year. And thank you one more time to our sponsors. Again, TD Bank as our Real Estate Economics and Development Series sponsor. Thanks for your support throughout the year. And our event sponsors today, Edison Properties, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, Hukin Brothers, NJEDA, NJIT, Martin Tuckman School of Management, PSE&G, Quest Diagnostics, Savills, Structure Tone, and our always reliable and ever-present media sponsor, New Jersey Advanced Media. With that, we'll close the event. If you do have anything that we can help you with, please let us know. Look forward to the email from Maya Curry afterwards that will provide some more information about how you can get access to some of the information presented today. Thank you all again. Take care. Bye.